everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak's Dragons of Tarkir set review for the color red. We're halfway through. We're 3 down and 3 to go. We've got green coming up tomorrow, and then the day after we have gold artifact, 1 colorless card, and 2 lands miscellaneous kind of wrap-up show. So stay tuned for those, of course. There are 3 disclaimers for these set review videos. I'm not going to go over them for a third time. If you're wondering what those are, you've hopefully already heard them in the first 3 videos. If you haven't, go back and start with white. You want to get the whole set review here. You don't want to start and only get a couple of the colors. But we're going to jump right on into the first card of red. We have a Tarkir Efreet. This is a 3-red, 5/1 creature Efreet Shamon at common. It has Megamorph, 2 and a red. When a Tarkir Efreet is turned face up, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This seems really big. A 5/1 is quite a sizable creature. That 1 toughness is pretty bad, though. I don't think the 1 damage is going to be super relevant in this format. Fate Reforged had a fair number of X1s across most of the colors, but I'm not quite seeing the density of playable X1s in Dragons. There are still a number, so you definitely will still get the occasional kill of something, although you are looking at that kill on turn 4 at a minimum in order to morph and megamorph this. More likely you're going to want to turn this up in combat to get through the extra damage that'll finish them off, or after combat perhaps, once combat damage has been assigned. Now after you do flip that up and get that 1 damage, which I think is not going to be super relevant, you are left with a 6/2 for 4, which is pretty big. The unfortunate part of this, and I repeat this time and time again when we get these big vanilla guys, is that there's no evasion on him. There's no flying, there's no cannot be blocked, there's not even pseudo-evasion like trample or first strike or things that just kind of let the creature live or in some way get through. And so that does kind of relegate this guy to a middle-of-the-road C. Think of Canyon Lurkers. This is a very good comparison to Canyon Lurkers. It's a big power, low toughness guy that's probably just going to trade with something, and trade relatively early. Not super excited to play this guy. Totally going to play him, and also totally going to cut him. Just like Canyon Lurkers, I think. Just solid middle-of-the-road C. Next up, we have a Tarkir Pummeler. This is a 4 and a red 4/5 creature ogre warrior at uncommon, and it says formidable. This is our first formidable card. This is the Tarkir mechanic. Formidable is just a keyword. It's not actually a rule. There's no rule associated with formidable. What formidable is sort of an umbrella term used for these abilities that only happen if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So it's kind of like a double ferocious, basically. So anyways, a Tarkir Pummeler has formidable. It says 3 red. Each creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by 2 or more creatures. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. This guy seems, decent enough, primarily in a big sort of red-green stompy deck. The can't be blocked by 2 or more ability is pretty powerful. We talked briefly about it yesterday. It's just a really powerful ability. It can really kind of screw up combat math, and it gets huge if you have a wide board. Any one creature not being able to be blocked by 2 or more creatures isn't backbreaking, but when your entire team is, it can be pretty bad. Yesterday I used the example of if you attacked with 4 creatures, which is not remotely unheard of, your opponent's going to need 8 in order to block, and that's pretty big. You're going to have to get to formidable to get this guy turned on, and that's what I'm really curious about, is just how commonly you're going to have formidable. Ferocious in cons, and Fate Reforged to a lesser extent. Was there Ferocious in Fate Reforged? I can't remember offhand. Anyways, Ferocious, it wasn't quite as common as I had expected on a lot of the cards. It was common enough that I definitely made the mistake frequently of playing spells and just assuming I had Ferocious, but it wasn't quite as common as I expected, I think. I expected to pretty regularly have 4 power creatures. So how common is it to have formidable in this format? And I don't know. I'm going to need to play with it to really find out. It doesn't seem that difficult. because you are getting a lot of relatively big creatures. I'm talking about 3 power, 4 power, and you only need 2 of them, 3 of them to really cross that 8 barrier. And, you pretty commonly will have 3 creatures down, 4 creatures down. So I don't think Formidable is going to be, that uncommon. I'm just going to be slightly cautious on it because I was probably a little bit over optimistic on how often I would have Ferocious. So yeah, this guy seems quite decent if you have that Formidable scenario. By himself, he's not that great. A 4/5 for 5 is just kind of eh. And without Formidable, he's just a 4/5 for 5. He's absolutely nothing else. So, by himself, he's just not that exciting. But with that ability, he's pretty good. It all comes down to Formidable and how common it is. It just seems like a decent include in most sort of stompy decks. If you're in a fast, aggressive deck, you're not going to want this guy, really. He's totally cuttable there. But I give him a C+. He's playable, I think, most of the time, barring, the hyper-aggressive special style deck. Next up, we have Berserker's Onslaught. This is a 3 red enchantment at rare, and it says attacking creatures you control have Double Strike. Double Strike is one of my abilities that I don't typically like, and I often get a lot of flack for saying I don't like it. I like it as a surprise. I like it on evasive creatures. Now, flyers in this format don't quite count as evasive creatures because this set does have the most flyers ever printed in a single set. So flying is definitely a little bit less than it was. But if the flyer's big enough, I kind of like Double Strike. And I like Double Strike when abilities do funny things with them. There's a Markov vampire of some sort in Innistrad that had Double Strike and got a counter every time it did damage. So it would do first strike damage, get a counter, and then do that 1 damage extra in the regular combat step and get another counter on it, and that was pretty good. I don't like Double Strike on just little things. I don't like Double Strike on little things, especially when my opponents clearly see it coming, when they see it printed on the card, or when they see a global enchantment giving it to my creatures. Double striking to your entire attacking team is kind of nifty. Kind of giving your entire team Double Strike is a little bit cool, but the fact that it's only when they're attacking means that you don't get this this boost, this benefit at all when you're on the defense. Your blockers are still piddly little single striking blockers. This is a 5 mana enchantment as well, so you're going to be not dropping a bomb on turn 5 or even a really good creature. You're going to be dropping an enchantment and hoping that everything else you have can kind of bring it home for you. This just seems really slow to me, and I don't like wasting a card on abilities like this. Enchantments that give your creature haste, enchantments that give your creatures trample. I just don't tend to like them. If this gave Double Strike all the time, I would have to look twice at it. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. But Double Strike just on attack on a 5 mana enchantment, it's just not what I want to be doing in drafting. I don't want to play this. This is for casual kind of format, I think. So this gets a straight up F. I'm just not looking to play this ever, really. A really fast, low curve aggro deck is where this would want to be, where you're going to, on turn 4 or 5, hopefully have a really wide board. But a super fast aggro deck like that is probably going to want to have almost won the game by the time this comes down. Yeah, and they also just don't want 5-drops usually. So I just can't go for this. I can't advise picking it, so I've got to go with a solid F on this one. Next up, we have Commune with Lava. Commune with Lava is an X red instant at rare, and it says exile the top X cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So this is kind of Red's version of card advantage that they've kind of settled on these days. Basically, it's this idea of kind of drawing a card, virtually drawing a card, except you need to use that card right now, right here. You're kind of burning a card off the top. And it's been okay, for example, when it's with Chandra. So you're not paying anything with Chandra. You're paying loyalty. Or actually, I think it was her 0 ability. So you're paying by not increasing her loyalty counters. And that was okay. When it's been on cards, I can't remember the card exactly. It was an M15, but it did the top 3 cards maybe or something like that. But it cost 3 or 4 mana. And so you had to pay mana to get access to these cards that you were going to have to pay mana to cast, and so it often just didn't work out very well. The nice thing with Commune with Lava is you do get some time to cast those cards, because it's instant speed. That means you play it at the end of your opponent's turn, and you get the entire next turn to cast those spells. You're going to untap all of your mana and have all of it available to cast those spells. The other option is you can cast this during your turn. So you can cast it for not all of your mana, and then maybe get a spell off the top. And then because it says until the end of your next turn, you actually get the rest of your turn, all of your opponent's turn, and then the rest of your next turn to cast those spells, which isn't that bad. It's a little bit slower. It allows your opponent more time to react to what spells you can potentially cast, because of course they get to see those cards. You don't exile them face down at all. It's interesting. I really have no idea about it. I don't think we've really had a card that has given us this kind of red card advantage with this amount of time and this amount of flexibility to actually cast the cards. It's usually been very quick, rarely at instant speed, and it's been just kind of middling there unless it was free or basically free. I think it's okay. I think an aggro deck is going to be pretty happy to have this. You know, when they start to run out of cards around turn 4, turn 5, they can cast this and get access to some more creatures and whatever else they need. I'm going to go with a cautious C+ on it. I could see it potentially being better than that even. I'm pretty happy to give this a try. We haven't really had anything quite like this before. We've had the kind of card advantage this gives us, but not quite that flexibility that this card does allow. So yeah, C+ for me, and I'd be happy to see that even go higher. Next up, we have Crater Elemental. Crater Elemental is a 2-red 0/6 creature elemental at rare. And it says pay a red, tap, sacrifice creature elemental. Sorry, not creature elemental, Crater Elemental. Crater Elemental deals 4 damage to target creature. Formidable, 2 red. Crater Elemental has base power 8 until end of turn. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So this is kind of interesting. This is interesting. It has some parallels to Goblin Boomkeg, which was completely unplayable. But of course you get to sort of decide when this blows up, as opposed to Goblin Boomkeg just blowing up the next turn. It's creature removal that your opponent sees coming a million miles away. They're well aware that you can deal 4 damage to their creature. If you're playing a good player, they're going to play around that. It does stick around until you want to use it, which makes it better than Boomkeg, and it's also a fairly solid blocker. But I don't tend to like playing blockers for the sake of playing blockers. That does not win you a game. That just stops you from losing a game quite as quickly. I just don't think it's that good. Skuldkin was kind of middling. It was playable sometimes, but I was never super happy with Skuldkin. And it was a 2/2 flyer, which is, in my books anyways, a much better than an 0/6 thing on the ground. I'm not sure if adding a couple of extra damage makes it that much better. The formidable ability seems a little bit kind of win more almost. If I already have 8 power on the field, do I really want another 8 power for a single turn that I have to pay for? Yeah, I don't know about this guy. It just kind of seems too cute. It's one of those cards that it's big on flavor. The mechanics very flavorfully tell what this creature is doing, but I don't think it ends up being a good card in decks at all. So I'm going to give it a C+. It's not first pickable, I don't think. If I'm in red and I see it come around my way, I'd probably take it. I still don't know if I'd actually play it, but I'll go with a C+ for now. Overall, I think it's too cute and just kind of eh. Next up, we have Descent of the Dragons. This is a 4 red sorcery at Mythic, and it says destroy any number of target creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So this has kind of a direct parallel to a card from Born of the Gods? No, it was Journey because it had Stride. Hour of Need. Hour of Need made 4/4 Sphinxes. Flying Sphinxes, actually. It wasn't remotely as good as I had hoped. I was thinking it was going to be kind of awesome to replace my board with these big flying sphinxes, and it just never really quite paid off that way. I either didn't want to blow up my board, or I didn't quite have enough mana. Now it had stride, so you had to pay for each target after the first. This is betterish, since you can just kind of pick whatever you want. You can pick one, you can pick 10 creatures if you want to blow up with this, and then you get 4/4 flying dragons in return. But I just don't know. It's pretty expensive. It is a 6-drop, which is kind of high on the curve, and the deck that I think would want this is a sort of wide aggro strategy. I just don't see this being good enough in limited just because of that casting cost. This could, of course, end up being useful in kind of a slightly more grindy deck, because you get to put out your little guys and keep them on the ground and then blow them up into bigger dragons. But I just don't know. I just don't think this quite works out in limited for me, so I've got to go with a C- on this. I'd love to see it work, but I think it's just too expensive ultimately. This really is at home in a commander deck or something like that, where you can jam out a bunch of tokens, something like Prosh or something, where you can get a ton of little kobolds and then turn those O1s into 4/4 flyers. Casual, commander, whatever, I'm sold on this card, but limited, I think I'm going to pass on it. Next up, we have Draconic Roar. This is a 1-red instant at uncommon, and it says, as an additional cost to cast Draconic Roar, you may reveal a dragon card from your hand. Draconic Roar deals 3 damage to target creature. If you revealed a dragon card or controlled a dragon as you cast Draconic Roar deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. Now this seems pretty solid to me. This is Lightning Strike, Incinerate, Searing Spear. It's had several different names, but the 1-red instant that deals 3 damage is always pretty darn good in limited. It would take a format where the creatures had such a high average toughness to make this not a great card, and this just is not one of those sets. This is totally super playable in limited, very high pick in the pack. First pickable in a weak pack where you open something really bad. This kills morphs. This kills nearly everything played on turn 3, nearly everything played on turn 4. Just huge. The potential upside of hitting both the creature and the player is pretty nice. I don't even care if it's not going to happen all that often. It's just a nice upside if it happens to be there. I'm taking this just purely off the 3 damage to target creature. Just solid spell. Totally a good pickup for me. I'm going to go with B+, and I'm going to play it every time I have it. Next up, we have Dragon Fodder. Dragon Fodder is a 1-red sorcery at common, and it says put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. So you get 2 little goblins. Keep in mind, this is not Raise the Alarm. Raise the Alarm was pretty darn good. It was 1 and a white that put 2 1/1 soldiers on the battlefield. What was the difference? Well, it was at instant speed, so you could very easily do it at the end of their turn and then have 2 little attackers on turn 3 or surprise blockers or things like that. Dragon Fodder is a sorcery. You're going to be playing these on your turn. They're not going to be surprise blocking. They are going to be very clearly coming down on the battlefield, and that makes this card worse. This is a reprint, by the way. I don't know offhand which set it comes from, but it is a reprint. I was not around for it the first time it came out, so I haven't experienced it in limited, but I just don't think it's that great in limited. I think there's other 2-drops that I'd rather be casting. I think there's other 2-drop spells that I'd rather be casting, rather than making 2 little 1/1 goblins. Maybe in a super aggressive deck this could work. This is probably more for Jeskai tokens or Rabblemaster decks or something like that. But in limited, I just don't think this is that solid. I'm going to go with C- on it. I think it's just kind of, pretty cuttable to me. I don't necessarily want 2 1/1s at sorcery speed. Next up, we have Dragon Tempest. This is a 1-red enchantment at rare, and it says whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until end of turn. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. So we've talked a lot in the past couple of sets about how much I don't like these sort of global enchantments, which is the old or an old term for these types of enchantments. I don't remember the exact rules, but I feel like you could only have one global enchantment out or something. But anyways, these enchantments that you have to put in your deck, you have to draw them, you have to cast them, and they just sit there and they don't do anything by themselves. Other stuff has to happen to make them actually do anything, and I don't tend to like those. Giving my team haste, or sorry, not even giving my team haste, but giving my flyers on my team haste, doesn't seem like a big enough upside to play this card. It's a nice low casting cost, sure, but you still have to pay the cost of playing this thing, and I don't think I want to do that for that. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield trigger, we've already talked a fair bit about how I don't think you're going to have that many dragons in any given deck. Yeah, you're probably going to face a few dragons over the course of an entire draft, but I just don't think the average deck is going to have more than one. And I think that you're not even guaranteed to have that one dragon in your deck. And so I don't think these cards, these Dragon Matters cards, are really going to be that impactful in Limited. I have a feeling that on average you're going to have one. And so Dragon Tempest's second ability doesn't do anything. Once, at one point in the game, you're going to get to do a damage. And that just does not seem remotely worth it for this card for me. This just seems like a flat-out F. I don't want to take this. I don't want to play this. I want to throw this in my Scion of the Dragon Commander deck. Absolutely I do. But I don't want to play this in draft. Not at all. Next up, we have Dragon Whisperer. Dragon Whisperer is a red 2/2 creature human shaman at Mythic. It has a whole bunch of abilities. First off, you can pay a red to give it flying until the end of turn. You can pay 1 and a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So it has the expensive version of fire breathing. It also has Formidable. 4 red. Put a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So this thing just gets to pump out dragons. They're 6-drop 4/4s, but, I'm okay with repeatedly making 6-drop 4/4s. I'm not a huge fan of playing them in my deck, but if I can just pump them out off of another card, yeah, sure, I'll sign me up for that. I think this card's obviously meant a bit more for constructed, for kind of red aggro. You get to play this on turn 2, and it's a 2/2 for 2, which is what red aggro kind of likes. And then what red aggro is usually missing is something to do in the late game. In the late game, you get to just start pumping out dragons to really finish off the deck. The flying on demand is probably going to be more important in Limited, at least for this guy. Making him into a 2/2 flyer for just 1 red is pretty good value. The fire breathing, I'm not usually a huge fan of fire breathing in Limited. I would prefer to be establishing my board and doing stuff rather than just getting in an extra damage or 2 here and there. But it's still fine, and it's still a fine mana sink if you don't happen to have anything else to do. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm pretty happy with this guy just kind of as is, ignoring that middle ability, and even ignoring the formidable ability. I'm pretty happy with this guy as is. With the formidable ability, I think this guy's great. The only problem I really have is how weak he is. Everything kills him. Every removal and burn spell almost in the game, in this format anyways, kills him. Most of the creatures kill him. It's going to die pretty regularly, I think, before you get to that 6. But if you get to that, the 8 power, the 6 mana. But if you get there, wow, is this going to take over? So I'm pretty happy with this guy. I give it a B+. It's outside of bomb range just because of how fragile it is. But it's nearly there. I'm pretty happy with this guy. I'll take him every time I see him. B+ for sure. Next up is Dragonlord's Servant. This is a 1 red, 1/3 creature goblin shaman at uncommon, and it says dragon spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This, of course, is a throwback to Dragon Speaker Shaman, I think it was, which was a 1 red something that gave the ability to dragon spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Everybody was hoping for a reprint in this set. We didn't get it, but we got this cheaper, kind of weaker version of it that gives us a 1 discount. Well, I don't think it's very good in Limited. It's clearly meant for the casual Dragon deck, the competitive Dragon deck if it exists, who knows. And of course EDH. This will certainly go into my Scion of the Ur Dragon deck. In Limited, yeah, we've already talked about the dragons to death, about how I just don't think there's that many playable dragons in any one person's draft pile. Yeah, you're going to see them going around. Yeah, you're going to see them during the draft, but I don't think you're going to get that many. And so I don't know that I want to play a bad creature just to make my one dragon a single mana cheaper. I don't think the dragon deck is going to exist in Limited. It's way too high of an investment to play that many, 5 and 6 and 7 drops. So I just think that this guy's trash, unfortunately. I don't think you should ever really play this. I'm going to give it a C-. If you want to build the dragon deck, be my guest. And it's an idea I have for a Wacky Wednesday draft for sure. But in a serious draft, I just think this guy's completely and utterly cuttable, nearing unplayable. Next up, we have Hardened Berserker. This is a 2 and a red 3/2 creature human berserker at common. And it says, whenever Hardened Berserker attacks, the next spell you cast this turn costs 1 less to cast. So we've got a back-to-back 1 less to cast creatures, but this one's much, much, much better because there's no restriction on what it casts or on what you can cast with it or what it fixes up. And we've had fake prowess. Now we've got sort of pseudo raid going on here. This guy has to attack, and then your next spell is 1 cheaper. This is a 3/2 for 3 in red. You're gonna be attacking with this guy, and making your next thing cheap is awesome. I think this goes really well in aggro decks. Play maybe a 1-drop, hopefully a 2-drop, 3-drop this guy, attack in with him, and maybe you get a couple of 2-drops on turn 4. Maybe you get, on turn 4. It just makes it cheaper to continue going wide and continue playing out your board. I think most red decks, and most red aggro decks especially, are going to be pretty happy to have this guy. It does fall off a bit in the late game. This 1 less to cast is something you want on turn 4 and turn 5 and turn 6. Beyond that, the discount really becomes not that good, not something that really matters unless you happen to be a little bit land screwed. So I do give it a C+ because it's not that great late game. It's not that great to top deck this in the late game. But in the early game, in the mid game, establishing your board, this seems just great. C+, it's almost a B- for me just because how much I usually like to be red aggro in draft. But I'm going to go with C+ for me just because it does drop off pretty heavily later on. Next up, we have Impact Tremors. This is a 1 red enchantment at common, and it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. In our case, limited, your one opponent, not each opponent at all. So you play a creature, and that creature just kind of pings your opponent for 1. Well, we've talked about these sort of enchantments that sit around and don't do anything until you do something else with them, and this is a good example. They have to do something absolutely amazing when you do something for them to be playable, and 1 damage to your opponent, you don't even get to pick off an X1 or finish off a creature or anything. It just goes to your opponent, is awful. The sheer number of creatures that you would have to play to make this viable is just not realistic in draft. Again, casual formats, commander formats, maybe even standard in a tokens deck or something. But even there, I don't think you'd play it. This wants way more creatures, way more tokens than you're ever going to see in this draft format. So this just seems completely awful to me. Don't pick this. Don't play it. Straight up F. Next up, we have Orc Shamon. Orc Shamon is a 1 red 2/1 creature Orc Shamon at rare. And it says Orc Shamon can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Megamorph for a red. 1 single red. When Orc Shamon is turned face up, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So he's got the Pyreheart Wolf ability, which I love. He's got a really cheap Megamorph, which I'm pretty happy to see. Or sorry, she actually. I just noticed the anatomy on the card there. So she has a really cheap Megamorph cost to make it into a 3/2. And then the face-up ability gives us that red card advantage. Not quite as flexible and as long as Commune with Lava gives us. But still, we get the whole turn. And unlike some of the cards in the past that haven't been that good, we've only paid 1 red to get that card. We should have mana left over to cast whatever we flip up. Yeah, this seems like a very solid creature to me for red aggro especially. You could just play it on turn 2 if you wanted a 2/1. You know, if you had an absolutely insane curve out, I could see this being played on turn 2 for a 2/1. Otherwise, you're definitely going to drop this on turn 3, get a 2/2 morph out of it, and then, you know, when you feel like it, when you've got the mana available, you're going to flip it up, get that extra card advantage, play that extra creature, play that extra burn, play that whatever, play the island, or play the land if you want to, and get in for the extra damage because now it's a 3/2. You know, this isn't a bomb by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of those solid role players that you really want in a deck, specifically in the aggressive red decks. I'm pretty happy playing this. The one thing to keep in mind with this, and you need to keep in mind with any of these sort of red card advantage spells, is if you flip up a land, you still have only 1 land drop. So make sure that if you're planning on attacking and flipping this, that you do not play a land before you flip it, in case you do flip a land and you want to play that one instead. But yeah, I give this a solid B. I'm going to pick this pretty highly, maybe even first pick, and I'm going to be pretty happy with this in every red deck, I think. Next up, we have Kindled Fury, which I'm 99% certain must be a reprint. Yeah, I remember it from M13 now. It's a 1 single red instant at common, and it says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. You know, this feels like Defiant Strike to me. It's one of those combat tricks that is pretty darn weak. The first strike is nice. The first strike definitely makes it a bit better than Defiant Strike for me, because that means that you're probably engineering, ideally, a situation in which you kill the creature as opposed to trading with it. But the +1 is just kind of weak. I'm typically not a big fan of these weak combat tricks. They make it into my deck when I'm not necessarily the happiest with how my draft went. I'm never upset to have them in my deck, but they're not premium combat tricks. One of the other big reasons is that, you know, it has kind of a narrow use. You know, if you're attacking in unblocked, 1 extra damage isn't really worth a card to me. If you're attacking in and you fully expect them to block with something, then this sort of becomes a removal spell, but it's still a little bit of a risky version. And on defense, of course, you do get, hopefully, that surprise first strike blocker where it's useful. So I really kind of consider this most useful on defense and not that useful on offense. Compare that to something like Awaken the Bear, which I consider very good on both offense and defense equally. And Awaken the Bear is a card that I would probably not cut as often as I cut it. Kindled Fury, on the other hand, just like Defiant Strike, is going to be on the other end of the spectrum, and it's going to be cutted, that's not a word, it's going to be cut most of the time from my decks. It'll make it in sometimes, but most of the times, cut, and that means it gets a C-. Next up, we have Culligan Aspirant. This is a 1 red, 2/1 creature human warrior at common, and it says whenever Culligan Aspirant becomes blocked by a creature, Culligan Aspirant deals 1 damage to that creature. This seems fairly decent. I believe it's basically Warname Aspirant, which couldn't be blocked by creatures with power 1 or less, and Culligan Aspirant technically shouldn't be blocked by creatures with toughness 1 or less, because it'll just blow it up. This is a decent ability. It virtually makes this a 3/1 as opposed to a 2/1 if there's any creatures being involved in blocking it, so your opponent's going to have to block with something a little bit tougher in order to still make it through. It's totally playable. A 2-1 for 2 in red, in your typical red aggro deck, is a completely normal filler that you'll play if you don't have anything better than it, and that extra ping damage gives it just a little bit more reach. Not super amazing, not a high pick, but totally playable if you have it, especially in the aggressive red deck. So I go with a C+ on this one. Next up, we have Culligan Forerunners. This is a 2-red star 3 creature human berserker at uncommon. It has trample, and it says Culligan's Forerunner's power is equal to the number of creatures you control. And it has dash for 2 and a red. So this is always going to be at least a 1/3, because it counts itself, of course. And then it's going to go higher from there. Very, very important. Don't get too pulled in by best case scenario mentality. What I mean by that is don't think about how awesome this would be if I have 9 creatures out and I play it and it's a 10/3, because that's not gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen in limited anyways that you get this to be a 10/3. On average, think about how many creatures you typically have out. 3, 4, in a stalled board, a crazy stalled board, 5 or 6. If somebody walks by at an F&M and they see 6 creatures on a board, they're going to comment that, wow, that's a crazy board, that's really stalled, that's really, really out of the ordinary. 3 and 4 is where this guy's going to usually be. So a 3/3 for 3, it's totally fine. A 4/3 for 5, even better. The potential downside of it sometimes being a 1/3 isn't really that big of a deal to me. This just seems like a solid filler card. Sometimes you will get that awesome 5/3, maybe even the 6/3. And it'll be pretty good, pretty awesome at that point, especially with the trample and especially with the dash, because it can come out kind of surprisingly at times. So yeah, this guy's just sort of fine, I think. He's not super cuttable, but I don't think he's immune from being cut either. So I'm going to go with a C+ on him. I'm definitely interested to see, on average, how well this guy works out, because I think some people might get a bit pulled in by the best case scenario. Next up, we have Culligan Storm Singer. This is a single red 1/1 creature human shaman at common. It has haste. It also has Megamorph for also a single red. And it says, when Culligan Storm Singer is turned face up, target creature gains haste until end of turn. So we have a 1/1 for 1 that you could morph if you wanted to and make it into a 2/2 for 1 on turn 4, and give you something haste. This probably sounds better than it actually plays out. It's a 1/1 for 1, which you're not going to play, right? We've hammered that home. 1/1s for 1 need to have pretty awesome abilities going on to be playable. So this is always going to be a 2/2 for 3 then. You're not going to play this as a 1/1 for 1. So a 2/2 for 3 is, that's a morph. That's kind of where we are now, but overcosted for a vanilla 2/2 for vanilla 2/2. And we're going to unmorph it for super cheap, hopefully after casting a creature that we really want to play and attack with right away. How often is this whole scenario going to play out? Well, probably not reliably enough for me to consider playing this very often. I think too often this card's just not going to pull it off. It's just not going to do anything other than flip up and be a 2/2 or give something haste and maybe you get in for some damage or do something good, but probably not. The upside on this just seems a bit too rare for me, so I'm going to go with a C-. I think this is pretty cuttable in a lot of situations. Next up, we have Lightning Berserker. This is a single red 1/1 creature human berserker at uncommon. We have another 1/1 for 1. This has fire breathing. You can pay a red. Lightning Berserker gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Not only that, you can dash this for a single red. So this card's all about the 1 mana. You can play it for 1 mana, you can dash it for 1 mana, and you can pump it for 1 mana. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's a 1/1 for 1 until you do something. You're not going to dash in a 1/1 for 1. That seems just terrible. So I guess the plan is to dash this in and pump it up. But, I mean, it's still not going to be a surprise. You don't get to dash this in after blockers have been declared or anything. Your opponent's going to see you put it down and turn it sideways, and they know you can pump it. I just don't think this card's very good. Aggro decks on turn 2, 3, 4, they want to be playing a creature every turn. Maybe even 2 creatures on turn 4 or something. They don't want to be turn 1 creature, turn 2 attack for 2, don't play anything, turn 3, or sorry, I guess attack for 3, turn 3 attack for 4, and still not play anything, because that's going to make them really, really, really vulnerable when this bites anything, any piece of removal or any creature except for an O something. Blocking it will just kill it off. So I just don't think this is very good. It's not what any deck really wants to be doing. Fire breathing is just generally not that good in limited, or arguably anywhere, to be honest. And late game, this just seems like absolute garbage to me. This gets an F from me. I don't ever want to play this card. It just seems so exceptionally weak and so exceptionally not what I want to be doing when I'm playing red. So yeah, straight up F for me. Never playing that card, I don't think. Next up, we have Lose Calm. Lose Calm is 3 and a red sorcery at common, and it says gain control of target creature until end of turn. On tap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn and can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So it's Active Treason plus Pyreheart Wolf's ability. I really hope it's actually Pyreheart Wolf, otherwise I'm saying the wrong thing. Yeah, Active Treason is never super playable. I see newer players play it constantly, and I play it here or there, but I never really like playing it, despite how much I hate getting killed by it. Giving it the can't be blocked except by 2 or more clause doesn't necessarily seem worth the extra mana, although it does make your Active Treason a bit better, since, of course, if you steal one of their 2 creatures, you basically make that creature unblockable. I don't know where to fall on this card, to be honest. I would give Active Treason probably a C-, I think. And I think this is going to fall in the same place. I think I'm going to go with C-. It has some cool interactions. You could have a red-blue or a red-black deck with Exploit and steal their creature, attack with it, and then exploit it, which would be pretty awesome. I would love doing that. And there are other sack outlets available, things like Karsi High Priest and Collateral Damage. So I think it's kind of cool. I think it could have some value sometimes if you have the right synergies going on. But ultimately, I think this is very cuttable, so I'm going to go with C-. Next up is Magmatic Canyon. Not Canyon, Chasm. This is a 1 and a red sorcery at common, and it says creatures without flying can't block this turn. So you're going to play this main phase 1 when your opponent has some flyers, and you're going to say, they can't block. I have a feeling that that's pretty rarely going to mean that you get in with all your creatures. I have a feeling it means that 1 or 2, maybe 3 of their creatures can't block, but even that's going to be pretty unlikely. I see this being as a sideboard card at best, something that you side in if your opponent does have a truly inordinate amount of flyers. But I just don't think it's going to affect the board really enough to ever warrant including this as a card over basically anything else. The set has a large number of flyers, the most flyers ever printed in a single set, but I still don't think this is going to hit all that often to make it really playable. So I've got to go with a D- on this. Maybe it'll have a place in the sideboard or something, but I doubt it. D-. Next up is Calsmash Behemoth. This is a 2 red 5/5 creature ogre warrior at uncommon. It says Calsmash Behemoth can't attack or block unless you pay 2. So it's a 3 mana 5/5. Obviously, it has to have a downside. That downside is it's not going to do anything on turn 3 or on turn 4. It can start doing something on turn 5, assuming you've hit your mana each turn. This does seem surprisingly okay to me. I've surprised myself by actually thinking about playing this card. Normally, I feel like that downside would be a bit too much for me. But the reason I do like this is because if you don't play it on turn 3, if you play it on turn 5 or turn 6 or late in the game, it seems a little bit better. Save turn 3 for your morph. Don't put this down on turn 3 just because you can. Put this down later when it's going to be able to attack the next turn and block the turn it comes down even, when 2 mana isn't really that big of a deal as it is on turn 4 or 5 or whatnot. The only other thing hurting this guy, of course, is the lack of evasion. A big, dumb 5/5 with no trample, flying, death touch, first strike, or anything isn't the best, so this isn't going to escape the C range, but I'm going to give it a C+. I'm surprisingly okay with this for some reason. It has all the hallmarks of things I wouldn't typically like to play, but for some reason I want to give this guy a shot, so I'm going to go with a C+ on him. The lack of evasion hurts, but I think if you play this guy strategically, it's going to be decent. The fact that cost becomes less and less and less important later in the game is what's kind of nice with him. Next up is Rending Volley. This is a single red instant at uncommon, and it says Rending Volley can't be countered by spells or abilities. Not really relevant for limited. Rending Volley deals 4 damage to target white or blue creature. This is the red color hoser. Obviously sideboard only. You're not going to main deck this. You're only going to bring it in when you're playing against blue or white, preferably blue and white. 4 damage to a creature. It's going to kill the majority of the things that you're going to see on the blue or white side of the battlefield. If you're against those colors, you're going to want to sideboard this in. If you're not, you're going to want to keep it out. Nothing else to say about this, really. Just a solid D sideboard card. Next up, we have Roast. Roast is 1 in a red sorcery at uncommon, and it says Roast deals 5 damage to target creature without flying. Well, that kind of sucks for the set that has the most flyers ever printed. It also kind of sucks that it doesn't hit players, but 5 damage for 2 mana would be pretty broken. That being said, it does hit everything else. It hits everything on the ground, and it kills basically everything on the ground. There are a whopping 2 creatures that this doesn't just straight up destroy in Dragons of Tarkir. It doesn't destroy Crater Elemental, and it doesn't destroy 3, I think. It doesn't destroy Marsh Hulk or Rakshasa Gravecaller or Sidisi Undead Vizier. Or a Wandering Tomb Shell. I'm seeing a whole bunch as I'm looking through the black. But the question, of course, is which of those are playable? Some of them are, some of them aren't. But ultimately, this is going to hit pretty much anything you want that's on the ground. And that means it's pretty solid to me. I like spells that kill things pretty handily. It kind of sucks that it's not at instant speed. You're not going to get the absolute value out of this card that you would out of instants that do this kind of damage. But it's going to knock everything you need off the ground. Kind of hurts that it's not going to hit flyers, so I'm going to keep it at a B-. I'm not going to go any higher than that. If it were instant, I'd go higher, and of course, if it hit everything, I'd go, much higher. But yeah, B- for me. I still think it's pretty darn solid. Next up, we have Sabretooth Outrider. This is a 3 in a red 4/2 creature human warrior at common, and it says Trample. It also has a formidable ability. Whenever Sabretooth Outrider attacks, if creatures you control have total 8 power or greater, Sabretooth Outrider gains first strike until end of turn. So this is a 4/2 trample. And then if you have another 4 power creature or some combination of 3s, 2s, whatever, you have 8 or more power on the field, he becomes a 4/2 trample first striker for 4. Which seems pretty okay. 4/2 is slightly weak for 4, but still pretty fine. It's going to die to a lot of stuff, unfortunately. But if you give it first strike, it's not going to die quite as much. As I talked about with Formidable, I'm going to need to play with it to find out just how commonly you're going to have it. But there's a good number of 4-power creatures out there, and having 2 of them turns on Formidable. So I think it's going to happen often enough to really be a thing. The lack of first strike on defense kind of hurts this a little bit. This obviously wants to be at home in a sort of aggressive deck where this guy's being turned sideways, and getting that first strike. But he seems totally fine. A C+. I think I'll keep him in a bit more often than I'll cut him. Next up is Sarkhan's Rage. Sarkhan's Rage is a 4-red instant at common, and it says Sarkhan's Rage deals 5 damage to target creature or player. If you control no dragons, Sarkhan's Rage deals 2 damage to you. I don't care about that last clause. I will take 2 damage gladly to do 5 damage to something, including a player, at instant speed. I like this a lot. This is better than Roast. This is the Roast that I've always wanted. It costs 5. That kind of sucks. That's pretty expensive, but 5 damage to whatever I want at instant speed, and all I have to do is take 2 damage. Couldn't care less about that 2 damage. I will kill everything in the set almost, or I'll just finish off my opponent pretty handily. Just arrow storm them basically, but at instant speed, which is nice. This seems like the premier common for red. I'm first picking this probably a fair number of the times when the rare in the pack is pretty bad. Don't worry about the Dragon's Claws. 2 damage in exchange for 5, that's nothing. Unless it's going to kill you, you shouldn't even remotely care about that. I'm going to pick this pretty highly. I give it a solid B+. The only thing keeping it from the A range is the 5 mana, of course. Next up is Sarkhan again. We have Sarkhan's Triumph. This is a 2-red instant at uncommon. It says search your library for a dragon creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is a dragon tutor. You get to go and find your dragon. This is sort of like having a second copy of your bomb dragon. A lot of people will say that. A lot of people have been saying that. But keep in mind, it's not quite that. It's sort of like having a second copy in that you have double the chance of drawing it. You still only have 1 copy. It's still going to die 1 time, and you're going to be out that dragon. And, we've talked about the dragons. I'm not that big on them. Unless you have a rare bomb dragon, I don't really see a reason for ever playing this card to tutor up one of the uncommon ones. Not only that, of course, you're telegraphing as clear as possible exactly what's going to be coming down probably the next turn to your opponent. I just don't think I want to waste a card slot on this. That being said, I don't have a whole lot of experience with cheap tutors in Limited. My experience has primarily been with things like Diabolic Tutor, which is pretty expensive. This is obviously a narrow tutor. You only get to go get a dragon. But ultimately, I just don't think it's going to be that good. Might raise some eyebrows here, but I'm going to go with an F. I don't like this card. I don't really see myself playing it. So, yeah, F from me. I'd like to see myself be wrong on this just because I don't have much experience with tutors and kind of learned my lesson, but I'm going with an F. Next up is Scream Reach Brawler. This is a 2-red, 2/3 creature Orc Beserker at common, and you can dash it out for 1 and a red. A 2/3 for 3, that tussles with morphs totally well. It is better than a morph on turn 3. It's obviously not better than what that morph will become, though. My guess is he probably has a place in the dash deck with the Ambuscade Shaman. Becoming a 4/5 dasher for 2. That sounds pretty darn good to me. But otherwise, he's pretty bland and cuttable. He's nearly as vanilla as you can get. So if you need if you're in the market for a 2/3 drop, here you go. But if you have anything better, pitch this guy to the curb. He's just not that great. That of course puts him at just a straight middle of the road C. Next up, we have Seismic Rupture. This is a 2-red sorcery at uncommon. And it says Seismic Rupture deals 2 damage to each creature without flying. So you get to do Pyroclasm to everything that doesn't have flying. And I don't know if there's that many creatures this would hit that have flying anyways. Yeah, this is, it sounds kind of cool. It loses some of that coolness right away when you realize it's not an instant, it's a sorcery. I don't terribly like the symmetrical effect of it when you're going to be playing just as many morphs as your opponent is. Kind of like, I can't remember the card, and I just played it at Draft Friday. Anyways, the 3 black-green from Cons that does -2/-2 to each creature, and you gain a life for each one that dies. At least that one's a 5-drop, so you can try to play around it. You can try to get all your morphs out of the way before you do it. This one's a 3-drop, which means you're going to be casting it probably turn 4, turn 5, turn 6. You may still have morphs down, which means you're going to have to wait longer to cast this. I just don't know about this. I feel like it almost borders on sideboard territory. Death Frenzy, that's the name of the card. I feel like this borders almost on sideboard territory, as Death Frenzy kind of ended up being for me towards the end of Cons. I used to main deck it, and then it became something that I kind of kept back a lot of the time until I saw that my opponent was going heavy on morphs or heavy on X2s. And I feel like this kind of ends up in the same place. I'm going to be slightly more optimistic about it and give it a C-. I'm going to keep it out of the sideboard grade range, but I think it could fall down there for sure. Next up, we have Sprinting Warbrute. This is a 4-red 5/4 creature ogre berserker at common, and it says Sprinting Warbrute attacks each turn if able, -3 and a red. So you can get this guy out a turn early. So you can get a 5/4 for 4, which is pretty aggressive, pretty nicely costed. I'd be pretty happy to play that. Playing it as a 5-mana 5/4 that has to attack every turn, that's a little bit less interesting to me. We're starting to get to more vanilla kind of costs on it and no real upside abilities on it. Thankfully, it doesn't die to a whole lot on the ground until your opponent starts to get truly established. I don't know. This could have a higher ceiling than I think it will, but I'm going to go with a C. I think it's just kind of cuttable when you want to and not cuttable when you don't want to. Again, if the dash deck happens, swinging in with a 7/6 on potentially turn 4 sounds just broken. So I would like to see that dash deck happen. But otherwise, I think this guy's just pretty cuttable. So, C, middle of the road. Next up, we have Stormcrag Elemental. This is a 5-red 5/5 creature elemental at uncommon. It has Trample, and it has Megamorph for 4 red. So for 6 mana, you can get a 6/6 Trample. Or for 6 mana, you can get a 5/5 Trample. Well, I know which one I prefer. I would prefer to pay 6 for a 6/6 rather than 6 for a 5/5. It, of course, depends on when this gets into your hand, but I think in almost all cases it would still be worth it to morph it and then unmorph it. Now, a 6/6 French vanilla body isn't the best. Trample's probably the best ability you want on a 6/6 for 6, barring flying, which you're not going to get for 6. If you really need a body at the end of your curve, throw this in. And if you don't play it. There's not much else to say about it. There's not much else to say about a fairly French vanilla dumb creature. And so this gets a C- for me. I want something else as my curve topper. I don't want this. So yeah, C-. If you really need it, it's there. And if you don't put it in. Next up is Stormwing Dragon. This is our uncommon monocolor dragon. Like the others, it is 5 and a red, 3/3 creature dragon at uncommon. Flying, this one has first strike. Megamorph 5 red like the others. And like the others, when it turns face up, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each other dragon creature you control. We've talked about these to death. I don't want to go over it again and again and again. 3/3 flyer for 6 is too expensive. Even with first strike, although first strike does make this one of the better ones of this cycle, 7 mana for a 4/4 flying first strike. Again, still not the best. And it's not that it's not worth it. It's just that draft typically is not slow enough for this to be something that happens reliably enough. So don't get me wrong on there. I've seen a number of people say, well, what do you expect for 7 mana? Do you expect a card that just wins the game? Partially, yes. But I rate them badly, and I talk bad about 7-drops just because you don't reliably get to even play them. And as we talked about with the +1/+1 counters on each dragon you control, I don't think you're ever going to have enough dragons to actually get that to do much. So this is going to get a C-. It's going to be one of the higher rated dragons because I am fairly okay with it being a first strike for that much mana, just like I was fairly okay with the lifelink one. But again, pretty darn expensive. I'd prefer to have something else as my curve topper than this, so C-. Next up is a card we have seen before in absolutely every case, except for the flavor text and the background of the art. This is Summit Prowler. It was in Cons. It's a 2/red 4/3 creature Yeti at common, exactly like it was in Cons of Tarkir. And exactly like it was in Cons of Tarkir, I think it's totally cuttable. If you need a 4/3 at 4, have at it. It's here. You can get one if you want it. If you don't have any use for it, throw it away. You don't need it. It's a flat-out easy C- for me. I have played these when I've needed them. I've never been terribly happy playing them, but they have gone in my deck when I needed them. Otherwise, they've been super cuttable, so C-. Next up, we have Tail Slash. Tail Slash is 2 red instant at common. It says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it is a fun one-sided fight. One-sided fights are my favorite kind of fights. You get to just presumably destroy whatever creature you want to destroy without any fear of reprisal from them. Not only that, it's a pretty low cost for it. 2 and a red is fantastic to see, especially with it being at instant speed. I'm very, very, very happy with this card. It's not quite as good as some removal because it does require a creature, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you're going to have creatures at some point in Limited. This seems like just great removal to me. I'm pretty happy to see it. I'm going to pick these relatively high and even a bit higher than Hunt the Week, which I really enjoyed. I'm going to give this a solid B. I love one-sided fights. What can I say? Next up is Thunderbreak Regent. This is the red rare Regent dragon. It is 2 red for a 4/4 creature dragon at rare. And it says flying, of course. And whenever a dragon you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, Thunderbreak Regent deals 3 damage to that player. This card people went crazy for. They thought it was going to be absolutely amazing, and I have to hope that the majority of that was aimed at Constructed. People assuming that this would, severely hurt Control because Control would just have to pay life for their spells to target their dragons on the other side of the battlefield. In Limited, we've talked about the Dragons thing to death. The Dragons Matters cards, I don't think they're going to be that good. I think that on average you're going to have a dragon, maybe 2 if you're really lucky, because there's just not that many playable ones that you're going to see all that commonly. Now, this is still a 4/4 for 4 flyer that your opponent has to pay 3 life to kill outside of combat, and that's still pretty darn good. I'm not trying to, be down on this card, and when we get to the grade, you'll see that I'm not. I'm just down on the ability. Don't get lured into the dragon deck, especially if that means that you're taking a bunch of the uncommon dragons. If you somehow manage to build a dragon deck that has 3 or 4 rare dragons, have at it, because the people at your table are passing some pretty good cards for some reason. But don't take the uncommon dragons just for this ability. They're too expensive. Ignoring that second ability, this is a 4/4 flyer for 4. Absolutely awesome. I'm going to take this pretty highly. I'm going to play this all the time because it's a 4/4 flyer for 4. It is a solid B for me, maybe even a B+. I'm taking this just for the stats. I'm not taking this for the ability. The ability is kind of cool because it counts for himself. Your opponent has to pay some life to kill this guy outside of combat, and that's pretty nice. That probably does just solidly bump up to a B- a B+ for me. Pretty happy with this guy. Just don't get lured into trying to force a dragon deck with the much less good dragons. Next up, for some reason, Red has gotten a couple of these cards. We have another card directly from Cons of Tarkir with different art and different flavor text. We have Tormenting Voice. It's a 1 and a red sorcery at common. As an additional cost to cast Tormenting Voice, discard a card, draw 2 cards. So you pay 2 mana, you discard a card, and you get 2. I've seen people play this. I understand the value of it, but I just don't like it. You know, I don't like rummaging that much, even if I get an extra card out of it. I don't like discarding a card to gamble on the top 2 cards. It's significantly better than discarding a card to gamble on just the one top card, which is okay sometimes, but I don't really like wasting a card slot on this, and that's my problem. If this was on a creature, I would do it, and I would do it all the time. I would love it. But wasting a card slot on this, I just really can't get behind. So I give it a D+. You know, I understand the value of it, but I just don't like the card slot cost of it. So I'm going to go with a D+ on this. If you play this and you like this, you can definitely rate this higher. But for me, it's just a D+ at best. Next up, we have Twin Bolt. Twin Bolt is 1 and a red instant at common. It says Twin Bolt deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 target creatures and or players. So you're going to deal 2 damage to a creature, 2 damage to a player, 1 to one creature, 1 to another creature, or 1 to one creature and 1 to a player. In limited anyways, of course, in other formats you could deal it to 2 different players. But, you know, this just seems like a good card. This is a slightly expensive shock or a slightly downgraded lightning strike that lets you split up the damage, and that just seems pretty solid to me. It's another piece of solid red burn removal, which the set seems to have a good amount of. Turn 2 is a great time to be able to play this. You get to kill off their 2-drop on turn 3. You get to kill off their morph or whatever you want. Maybe you even get lucky and you get to ping off 2 X1s. Finish off a creature or even a couple of creatures after combat. I just see a lot of really versatile uses for this. I'm very happy to pick this up relatively early and include it in every single red deck I ever play. B- for me. The minus is just because it is just 2 damage, but you can't ask for much more from a 2-drop. Pretty happy to have this card. B- for sure. Next up, we have a reprint. We have Vandalize. Vandalize is 4 and a red sorcery at common, and it says choose one or both. Destroy target artifact, destroy target land. Unfortunately, there's just not that many artifacts that I'm really concerned about destroying, and there are no lands that I'm concerned about spending 5 mana to destroy. Land destruction back in the old days was far too cheap. And people would play land destruction decks, and it would really just kind of ruin the game for the player who just basically didn't get to play Magic. So land destruction these days is very expensive, prohibitively expensive, in fact, and so much so that you basically just don't ever play it. And that's the case here. Don't play this. If you want to destroy an artifact, there are a number of better, cheaper choices in this format to do it. If you want to destroy lands, you need to go back in time. You need to go back 10, 12 years to Stone Rain or things like that. This is just a straight-up F. Don't take this. Don't play it. There are better choices for the artifact destruction. Next up, we have Volcanic Rush. Volcanic Rush is a 4 and a red instant at common, and it says attacking creatures get +2/+0 and gain Trample until end of turn. So it's Trumpet Blast plus Trample. Apparently, Trample for your team costs 2 mana. Because this is basically Trumpet Blast remastered. Giving Trample to things you're Trumpet Blasting is actually kind of cool, because Trumpet Blast usually, was used to finish the game ideally. You're attacking in and there's no blockers. But it was also sometimes used to just kind of clear the way, clear the battlefield a bit. Your guys would probably, some of them at least would die, but you'd be able to kill off a good percentage of their blockers, maybe even all their blockers. Giving your team Trample means that you're going to get a whole bunch of incidental damage through those blockers, hopefully. Is that worth 5 mana? It's pretty debatable. I think ultimately this is a bit more cuttable due to the cost, really, and due to the requirement that you need a wide field. Trumpet Blast really required a certain type of deck. And even though I mentioned that sometimes you would use it to sort of clear a path to just, throw a bunch of things and surprise kill them all. That was a rarer use of it. It was really used to finish the game when you knew a lot of creatures were going to get in unblocked. And it was useful because it only cost 3 mana. You could do it a lot sooner. You could do it even after casting some things. I think 5 mana is just too expensive for this. I'm going to give it a C-. I can see myself losing to this, and I can see it being played in the right type of deck. But ultimately, I think it's going to be pretty cuttable. Next up, we have another Volcanic card. We have Volcanic Vision. This is a 5 red sorcery at rare. And it says, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponents control. Exile Volcanic Vision. They don't want you Volcanic Visioning your Volcanic Visions. Yeah, this is expensive. 7 drop, 5 red. This is too expensive to play just by virtue of the fact that it's 7 mana. 7 drops are something you need to very, very, very carefully consider playing in Limited. It's also expensive because you need to play other expensive instants and sorcery cards. I do not want to pay 7 mana to recur a 3 mana combat trick and do 3 damage to my opponent's board. That doesn't sound all that amazing to me for 7 mana. So you have to pay the cost of putting this in your deck and taking up a card slot. You have to pay 7 mana, and you have to pay the cost of putting in an expensive instant and sorcery, of which there are very few that are truly playable. So this seems more like a commander thing to me or something, or a casual card. This is an F. I don't want to play this. I don't want to ever put this in a Limited deck. Just straight up F for me. Next up, we have Warbringer. Warbringer is a 3 and a red 3/3 creature Orc Beserker at uncommon. And it says, dash costs you pay cost 2 less. And it has Tash for 2 and a red. Wow, I like this guy. Yeah, I talked about Ambuscade Shaman being a dash enabler. This is the other dash enabler. If you can live the dream and draft Ambuscade Shaman and Warbringer, I want to see your deck. I want to see it played out. I want to see how awesome that dash deck could be. Dashing in Goblin Heel Cutter for a red? Awesome. Dashing in Mardu Scout for a red? Awesome. Dashing in stuff for two cheaper sounds really, really, really cool. Keep in mind, this does only reduce colorless mana. So it reduces the cost by 2. That means Mardu Scout isn't free. You still have to pay the red. You still have to pay the colored requirements. But still, in the aggressive red dash deck, this guy is an all-star. In the black-red dash deck with Ambuscade Shaman, I think this could be insane, and I want to see it, and I want to do it badly. Outside of that deck, outside of the I'm playing a ton of dash creatures deck, this guy's not great. He's basically Alicia's Vanguard, which wasn't all that good. It was playable as a one of if you really needed it, but otherwise it was very cuttable. So I'm going to give this a C+, despite how excited I am for it, just because it does, I think, require you to build that specific deck. Outside of that deck, it loses a whole lot of its upside. But if that deck happens, it's going to be because of this guy just as much as Ambuscade Shaman. So yeah, C+ for me. All right, last card for red. We have Zurgo. He's not Zurgo Helm Smasher anymore. He's gotten a significant downgrade. He is Zurgo Bell Striker. This is a single red mana for a 2/2 legendary creature Orc Warrior at rare. Zurgo Bell Striker can't block creatures with power 2 or greater, and you can dash him for 1 and a red. Well, we don't play 1/1s for 1. Do we play 2/2s for 1? Absolutely we do. 2/2s for 1 are fantastic. Yeah, this seems like a solid creature in the all-in red aggro strategy. Otherwise he's not that great. He's awful in the late game. You don't want to top deck this guy. But early game, especially on that turn 1, this is a solid play. It reminds me of Rakdos Cackler, which was a pretty decent pick in draft. but it had to be in the right deck. You're not going to throw a Rakdos Cackler, nor are you going to throw Zergo into a red-green Stompy deck or a red-green Ramp deck or something like that. But the all-in red aggro strategy, this guy is going to be pretty darn useful in it. In that strategy, you're not going to care that this guy can't block. Outside of that strategy, unfortunately, you're going to care quite a bit, I think. A 2-2 that can't block anything that's bigger than 2 kind of sucks because you lose the ability to have a chump blocker. But yeah, otherwise I'm pretty happy with this guy. I do tend to go towards aggro decks lately. I used to be more of a control tempo player, but I've been pretty aggressive lately. So I really like this guy. I'm going to go with a B- on him. I think he's just a pretty solid pick for the red aggro deck. Unfortunately, I don't think he's a first pick. I don't know that there would be a pack where there wasn't something else better than him for first pick. But if I saw him second or third or fourth, I'd probably pick him up pretty readily, especially if I had already taken a red spell that helps me go towards the red aggro deck. So yeah, I'm going to go with a B- on him. He seems weak, but I think he's just a solid role player in the deck that he wants to be in. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for red. Red looks pretty interesting. Like black, it has a lot of really good removal. It's not straight up removal, it's burn, but it's pretty good. It does unfortunately have a whole lot of Fs, especially at rare. There's 3 or 4 rares that I gave Fs to, a bunch of commons I gave Fs to. So yeah, red seems kind of swingy. It seems kind of like Fate Reforged, where the good cards are awesome and the bad cards are horrifying, and there's not a huge in between. There's a good number of Cs though, so I'm still interested to see how it plays out. But like black, I think I want to be taking the good rare burn and pairing it with white, or pairing it with blue, or who knows, maybe green. We haven't gotten there yet though. We'll have to talk about that tomorrow. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, etc., let me know in the comments below. You can also find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/themanaleek. And links to those social media sites are in the show notes. You should also subscribe to my channel. That'll keep you up to date on all the latest videos as they pop up, including the remaining set review videos this week, as well as the videos when we get back to our normal spiky Saturday and wacky Wednesday schedule. There's going to be some fun stuff coming up, some cubes, some Rise of the Eldrazi, some fun stuff coming up, so stay tuned for that. But you can subscribe by clicking the little subscribe button down there, or the one that's on the outro that's going to be popping up pretty darn soon. As always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the green set review.